let me get your first thoughts on this, Amy. When you heard about what was going on USS Abraham Lincoln, what were your initial thoughts as someone who's, I don't know, deployed and done that as a combat pilot on an F-18?
My initial thoughts were that there's always two sides to a story. I didn't want to jump to the conclusion that, the USS Abraham Lincoln was somehow poorly run or anything. I just don't believe that. The commanding officer there and the officers there and the leaders are doing everything they can under really tough conditions. That said, it wasn't surprising to me. Because of the operational tempo that these sailors have been dealing with for the past 200 some days. And, I think that lost in the sauce here is the people need to know the sailors of the Lincoln, they're not failing. They are working their butts off. And the system right now is kind of consuming more readiness faster than the Navy can keep up. The Navy is under strain. And we're going to talk about that tonight. The reasons why, one of the main reasons why is because we started this war when we weren't really prepared for it. We were told it was going to be 6 weeks. And we lost some bases along the way in the Middle East. And, that's where we're at. And our sailors are suffering, but they're working their asses off to get through it.
My initial thoughts were complete failure of leadership. And what I mean by that is the civilian
at the political
leadership,
level.
Yes, at the political civilian level, lacking the basic understanding of maritime operations, lacking the basic understanding of strategic placement, and not even remotely asking the question about logistics to support a sustained operation. Completely obvious off the bat, because.
And human factors.
And there was my next point. And the endurance of someone deployed and the differences between deployment. You may have seen, ladies and gentlemen, multiple people, especially on Fox News, try to call these sailors weak and whining, but let me be very crystal clear. As someone who got extended on deployment as XO on Anzio the last time that happened, 9 months in the Gulf, okay? This stuff wears on you mentally, especially the watch sections that they're in, Amy, port and starboard. For those who don't know, that's like either 6 on, 6 off or 12 on, 12 off, and still have to do your regular job. And if you're on the flight deck, and the heat, the pavement, it's 120 something degrees for hours. And then when you go to sleep, your rack where you sleep is usually underneath the goddamn place where the jets are landing, right?
They're coming down on you.
It's
you
like,
get used to that.
Exactly. And so to explain this to land lovers, I see now why Navy people say land, because they don't know. The guy who went on the rant, who, I'm sorry he had his legs blown off in Afghanistan, talking about that's the job. Okay, cool. World War II, the longest deployment any ship went on deployment without touching a port was 72 days. They're now 3 times that length and doing combat operations in a much more sophisticated fight. But you got the nerve and actual audacity to call them weak? Get out of here.
Yeah.
Never served.
What people have to understand is this is not a matter of like, I'm strong or I'm weak or any of that bullshit. The human beings those sailors are a weapon in itself. You wouldn't not maintain your weapon, whether it's a Sea Whiz or an aircraft or something. Human beings are part of the weapon system, a big part of the weapon system, and that human factors matter. And that there's always stresses of being on a deployment, but this is much different. It's a longer deployment. It is a higher, what we call op tempo, which basically means it's harder than any deployment. So longer and harder. And it's bigger than just, I don't have fresh lettuce. These sailors are under enormous stress. Their deployment was supposed to end in May. It's record setting for the most uninterrupted time at sea. That means they never get a port call. They never get a break. Okay.
Nope.
And that hurts. It's very stressful. They're dangerous ops, as you said, challenging living conditions. The burnout rate is enormously high. And another worry that I have is the long-term readiness, not just what's happening on the Lincoln right now, but we're going to lose a lot of people because of this. You get to the point where you're degrading the force that you need for the next mission. We call retention, right? Because people are going to say, wow, do I have to go through another deployment like that?
Yep. That's you're dead on accurate. And this is once again having strategic foresight and vision beyond 3 weeks, right? The other thing that I need people to understand about being at sea, and I don't know how to convey this any more than this. I'm going back to the Fox guy, the combat infantry officer, etc. Understand something. There is no camp, no green zone that you can go back to, right? Look, as a sailor, I did an Army job back when they did those individual augmentees. I was in sub-Saharan Africa, in Liberia, right after their civil war. And I knew there was a place that I could eventually go back to when my patrol was done and get covered up and protected. When you are out at sea, the environment itself is dangerous. Period. You can be getting trailed by a sub. You can have anybody come up to you in the middle of the night. So you're always on watch and you're always on edge. Now imagine that environment for 200 plus days without break. You have sleep deficits that create a sleep debt that you never recover from until the deployment is over. There are so many things that factor in that they don't think about. Even when we go to anchor. Important. The name of the show is Anchor Watch. You know why, ladies and gentlemen? Because when a ship drops an anchor and it's not next to a port, it's dropping an anchor, that anchor itself can drag and you can wake up the next morning and the ship's completely in a different location because of currents. So you have someone who sits in the middle of the night and just looks at the anchor chain go down. Literally. But these guys who've never stepped, Army, I've had a couple of Army people on a ship at one time with me, and none of them lasted more than 3 days before they threw up. Because they were seasick. None of them. That's why they're in the Army.
I'm not surprised.
Don't have it. So, hell, we get Marines. No offense to your service, but we get Marines the first week to acclimate. They're over the side of the ship too, throwing up. Now, multiply that by 36 weeks, 37 weeks. I can't with these.
There's no reason to say anything other than kudos to the folks who are out there. But